Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of chapter 1. So in this part of the video, we are going to actually talk about the threats and attacks that is happening. So as Sun Tzu's The Art of War stated, one who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be in danger in 100 battles. One who doesn't know the enemy but knows himself will sometimes be in danger and sometimes will be losing, and one who doesn't know the enemy and doesn't know himself will be in danger in every battle. So based on this statement, in order to protect our organization information, we must know ourselves. We need to be familiar with our information assets. We need to know our system, mechanism, and methods that we are using to store, process, and protect them. Then we also need to know the threats that we are facing. So first we need to know ourselves. We need to familiar ourselves with our information assets. Then we also need to know the threats that are out there. So what is a threat? A threat is a potential risk to an information asset, whereas an attack represents an ongoing act against the asset that could result in a loss. So attack is basically an ongoing act that can happen. Basically, the threat agents, they damage or steal an organization information or basically your physical assets by using exploits to take advantage of the vulnerabilities that our system has. Unlike threats, which are always present, attacks exist only when a specific act may cause a loss. So there is always a threat that could, that we are facing. But attack is only happening when a specific act can happen and it could cause a loss of maybe loss of a data, loss of a privacy, loss of, money or anything like that. So there are actually 12 categories of threats in information security that we are facing. So in here we have the category of threats and then some of the examples of the attack. So one category could be compromise to intellectual property. And the attack could be maybe the piracy or the copyright infringement. So these are type of attacks that, compromise our intellectual property. The category of threat, another category could be deviation in quality of service. So another example of attack, it could be attack that happens on internet service provider or on our power line or on our network. Another category of attacks is espionage or trespass. Some of the attack example could be, in order, if you want to do, if you want to trespass a system or do some espionage activity, you might do unauthorized access of the data. Forces of nature. This is another threat. That's always, we had that hurricane, for example. It could be a fire. It could be an earthquake or something like that. Some things that is out of our hand. Human error or failure. Again, this happened again to the actually Manatee County School District recently, that the employee released the social security of all these employees, and by mistake, because somebody actually it was a human error. Information extortion is basically also another attack example. Could be blackmailing or information disclosure. Sabotage or vandalism is another category of attack. And the example of that attack could be destruction of a system or information systems. Another category of threat could be software attacks. And some of the example of that happens all the time, and that's why we might have these antivirus softwares, are viruses, worms, denial of service attack, and so on. Another category of threat could be technical hardware failure or errors, and that could be basically, it's maybe your equipment fails, maybe your system could fail. And technical software failures, again, the type of attack could be in terms of bugs or some loopholes that are open in your system or in your programs, or some coding problems that the person who codes it made a mistake. Category of another threat could be technological obsolescence, means that your technology is basically outdated. So the attack is sometimes your technology is not going to support it. And another category of threat is theft. And the example of that attack could be illegal confiscation of equipment or information. So basically, these are some of the categories of threats that we need to familiar ourselves. So let's look at each of them in a little bit more details. So let's discuss more about intellectual property. Intellectual property could be a trade secrets, copyright, trademarks, or patents that the organization could have. So intellectual property is protected by the copyrights and other laws that carries the expectation of proper credit to the source. The unauthorized appropriation of IP constitute a threat of information security. So these, so basically software piracy or copyright protection and user registration, these could be type of attack that could happen on this or on the company. Deviation in quality of service, as I mentioned earlier, an organization information system depends on basically successful operation of many independent support systems. So in order for our information system to work, we need to have power grids, data communication lines, we need to have service with our vendors, and even we need to have service with janitorial staff and garbage haulers and stuff. So any of these support systems that can be interrupted by whether it could be a severe weather, employee illnesses, or unforeseen events could cause problems. Irregularities in internet service and communication can also affect the availability of the systems as well. So some of the subcategories of these threats includes internet service issues, communication and other service provider issues, and also power irregularities. Espionage or trespass, when somebody who doesn't have access or who is not authorized to gain access to information is trying to protect, the act is categorized as espionage or trespass. Attackers could use various ways to access our information systems, and they can actually use a web browser to perform some sort of a market research and kind of basically gather some intelligent information about our companies maybe. So when the information gatherers employ techniques that cross a legal or ethical threshold, they are conducting industrial espionage. So basically, in real world, a hacker spends a long hours of time looking at a lot of type of documents and using some sort of a skill set to be able to bypass the controls that we have put on our systems. So normally the hackers, they use a wide range of skills, and they use a lot of nowadays the hacking techniques are a little bit easier, but also a lot of people are becoming knowledgeable in order to protect the system as well. So once an attacker get access to the system, the next step is basically to increase the privilege. So basically, most accounts that are associated with the system has only use permission. The attackers normally need more than just a use. So they are trying to get more access levels, such as like administrative level or a root access privilege. So password attacks also fall under the espionage category or trespass. Sometimes attempting to guess or reverse calculate a password is called cracking. There are other approaches into cracking a password. One of them is brute force attack, which basically application of computer and network resources. They are trying to use every possible password combination that are out there. Other ways is to use a dictionary password attack, which also using the brute force attack and narrows the field by using a dictionary of common passwords that are out there, that, you know, information that could be related to the user, like for example, you know, maybe a name that the user knows with a birthday or something like that. Rainbow table is a database of hash values and their unencrypted equivalent against which an encrypted password file can be compared to. Also, another way of password cracking is to use social engineers. Basically, attackers could pose as somebody else, like as an employee, to gain access to the system, and then ask the other employees to give them the username and passwords and gain access that way. Force of nature, as I just mentioned, hurricane, maybe fire, are basically the force of nature. And it's not possible to avoid these threats. So the companies have just limited control, but they need to prepare themselves in terms of if something happens. So a contingency plan needs to be in place. So most forces of nature can only be mitigated through insurance. So of course, all these companies will have insurance, but in order to be up and running, they need to have some sort of a system somewhere else, maybe replicated somewhere else. In terms of if a hurricane hit maybe this part of Florida, maybe their system in Massachusetts is up and running and it's kind of working at the same time. So there is no system downtime. So these are just basically some of the type of forces of nature attacks: fire, flood, earthquake, lightning, tornadoes, and tsunami, and basically dust contamination. Also, electrostatic discharge. So these are basically some sort of a forces of nature attack that could happen. Human error or failure. Basically, this could act without the intent of, maybe somebody doesn't even know. So it's not intended for bad purposes. So, and sometimes, when people, they use the information, some mistakes happens. So, especially if you don't have a policy in your organization. Also, if maybe the employee doesn't have a proper training or they are not experienced maybe. So one of the greatest threats to a company's information security is basically its own employee. As basically they are being used as a threat agent. So this is very important to provide the training to making sure that all the employees knows about all type of attacks that could happen to the system, and also they are familiar with, like, for example, viruses, and they are familiar with, okay, this could be like a this could be like a phishing attack or something like that. They need to be trained in that. So as I mentioned, the Manatee School Board just lost a lot of, information because of that. And so a lot of employees' ID got jeopardized because an employee gave the information out. And maybe the proper training was not there. So the employee kind of, got tricked and provided the information to unauthorized person. So some typical human errors or failure attacks could be like social engineering, advanced fee fraud. Other ones could be phishing, that a lot of things like you are manipulating the URL, or also website forgery, and pretexting. So these are basically some type of a human error or failure attacks that could involve the employees. This information extortion is another terminology that you need to familiar yourself. So it is normally common in the theft of credit card numbers. So cyber blackmails occurs when cyber criminal breach the corporate networks to discover maybe a lot of materials. And in 2017, actually, Netflix, they fall into this category. So the hackers basically shared some unreleased episodes of a Netflix series, and they have asked for money, but because they didn't pay them, so they have shared these unreleased episodes earlier. The same year, another cyber extortionist also did the same thing to Netflix, and they actually asked for Netflix to pay them $5 million in Bitcoin, which is the cryptocurrency that normally being used by the hackers, and otherwise they will unair the episodes of Game of Thrones. So these are kind of happening to the organizations. Also, there are a lot of ransom scams out there that sometimes the victims' devices are being infected with malware that prevents unauthorized user from accessing the devices. So the victim, if they want to get access to their devices, they need to pay some money. Otherwise, they don't give them their device back, and maybe they lose everything. So that's another way that a lot of these extortionists are actually working. So also this happens on the databases as well. So the database ransom attacks also being carried out by the hackers, who basically identify and hijack the databases, in different versions like MySQL, MongoDB, and so on. And then they are actually asking for money in terms of Bitcoin cryptocurrency to release the information, because in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency you cannot really trace who this money belongs to or where it comes from. The next thing that we are going to talk about is sabotage or vandalism. Basically, this category of threat involves deliberate sabotage of a computer system or business, and it could actually destroy an asset or the reputation of the company. So this act can carry out by employees or maybe by organized sabotage against the company, and normally the company loses its reputation or maybe the image, and they want to damage that. Or sometimes it could lose a lot of money, or maybe sometimes it could actually lose their customers. So let's talk about software attack. Deliberate software attack happens when an individual or maybe group maybe group of individuals designs and deploys some software to attack a system. This attack consists of the software that the attackers trick the users into installing it on their system. Then the software can actually be used to overwhelm the processing capabilities of the online system, or maybe somehow when the software is installed, they can actually use it to gain access to the protected system by gaining access to the system. Software attacks also could be malwares, including viruses, worms, Trojan horses, some type of a polymorphic threats or hoaxes. They could also be black doors, trapdoors, maintenance hook, They could be denial of service attack. They could be in terms of a spam, mail bomb, social engineering attacks, and so on. Also, another thing could be basically the hardware failure. Technical hardware failure, or the error can occur when sometimes the manufacturer that distributes this equipment has some sort of a flaw in it. These defects can cause the system to perform outside of what it's expected to perform. So in hardware terms, failures are measured in terms of in the mean time between failure and the mean time to failure. So MTBF and MTTF. MTBF presumes that the item can be repaired or returned to the service, and MTTF presumes the item needs to be replaced. So basically, from the companies, they need to take these into the consideration. If they need to repair or return the service, or maybe they can get a replacement of the service. Also, software failure. Softwares could also fail. Lots of computer codes are written, debugged, published, and sold before all the bugs has been detected or resolved. So sometimes this could cause a problems, and sometimes maybe some parts hasn't been tested for certain failures. So, and basically sometimes these bugs are not errors, but they are there purposely. There are some shortcuts that are left for by programmers, and to bypass the security check or something like that. And these are called trapdoors. Among the most popular bug tracking website is BugTrack. That's hosted by Security Focus, which can provide up-to-minute information on the latest security vulnerabilities, as well as other past bugs that has been there. So this website BugTrack is very important for the security personnel, so they can actually, if there is a software issue or a software bug, it's reported in that website. And you can also report as well if you find a bug, or if there is a trapdoor in your website, in your software that you find. So the Open Web Application Security Project, or OSP, list of the 10 most critical web application security risks. One of them is injections for the databases, broken authentication and session management, cross-site scripting, insecure direct object reference, security misconfiguration, sensitive data exposure, missing functional level access control, using components with known vulnerabilities, and also unvalidated redirect and forwards in the websites. So some of the deadly sins of software securities that, maybe the programmers can make a mistake and implement it. SQL injections, web server related vulnerabilities in the web applications, use of magic URL, predictable cookies, and hidden form fields. In terms of implementation, all of these buffer overrun, command injections, information leakage, also poor usability, not updating easily. These are all some of the problems with the software security. In terms of cryptographic scenes, maybe use of passwords that are weak, maybe weak random numbers using the wrong cryptography. And then in terms of the networking scenes, maybe failure to protect network traffic, improper use of PKI, especially the SSL, and also trusting network name resolutions. So the next thing, we will talk about the technological obsolescence. Basically, maybe the infrastructure is outdated, and that could lead to unreliable or untrustworthy systems. So the management in the organization, they need to understand that when the technology becomes old, there is a risk of losing data, and also there is a high risk of attacks on it. So proper planning by management could prevent the technology from becoming obsolete, and but they need to take that into consideration, and they need to make sure that they will change that. They need to update their systems. The last thing that we are going to talk about is about the theft. So sometimes the information could be copied without the owner's knowledge. And the physical theft basically can be controlled easily than the electronic theft, because you can put some sort of a security measure in place, such as locking the door, having a trained security personnel, having alarm systems in place and things like that. But for the electronic theft, it's more complex problem to manage and control it. So the theft is often overlapping category with software attacks, espionage or trespass, information extortion, and compromises to intellectual property. So that's about it for this part of the lecture 1. So we covered 2 parts so far. The next part that we are going to cover is going to be about the management of the information security. Okay, so watch the next video. Take care for now.